The ship tore itself apart around him. Morgan Reed barely made it to the escape pod as molecular disintegration warnings blared. He crashed onto a neon-lit alien world, medical kit still intact. Then he found her, pinned under wreckage with 4 hearts and skin that glowed. He thought it was just a routine field amputation, but when he reached for her hand to comfort her during the procedure, she wouldn't let go, and that's when everything changed. Morgan watched his diagnostic screen flicker through warning states. The Wayfarer's structural integrity field dipped below 10%. Every alarm on the bridge flashed a hard, urgent red. A low hum vibrated through the deck plates, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth just before something gives way. Outside the viewport, the emerald moon called Luminina 60s washed everything in eerie chartreuse light. It was beautiful, in a cold and different way, the kind of beauty that makes you feel small. The ship shuddered again, harder this time. Metal groaned somewhere deep in the hull. A voice crackled over the ship-wide comm. Molecular destabilization in progress. Total structural failure in 4 minutes 50 seconds. No panic in the automated tone. Just facts. Morgan's fingers moved on the console out of habit, trying to reroute power, trying to find a system that hadn't already failed. Nothing responded. He muttered under his breath, criticizing the ship's Shiji. Too many redundancies in comfort systems, not enough in the structural stabilizers. A luxury cruiser trying to be an explorer. He unbuckled from his station and grabbed his medkit from under the console. The weight of it was familiar, reassuring. Gravity wavered as he moved into the corridor. The deck tilted under his boots. Crew members rushed past, faces tight with controlled fear. They were professionals. They knew the drill. Evacuation protocols were clear. Priority 1, get to the pods. The sound of screaming metal grew louder, a high-pitched shriek of stress. He reached Pod Epsilon just as the artificial gravity cut out completely. He pulled himself inside, the motion practiced, efficient. His breathing was steady. He'd done this in Sims 100 times. He slapped the activation panel. The hatch sealed with a definitive hiss. Through the small viewport he saw the Wayfarer begin to come apart. It didn't explode. It unraveled. Sections of the hull simply lost cohesion, peeling away into shimmering particles. It was a quiet, ghastly dissolution. Below, the alien jungle reacted. Luminous shapes like giant squid made of light erupted from the canopy. They fled from the dying ship, scattering into the deep violet shadows of the forest. His pod shot away from the dying vessel. The escape trajectory was rough, tossing him against his restraints. The planet filled the viewport, a swirl of neon greens and deep blues. Then came the violent shudder of atmospheric entry. The pod shook, heat shields glowing orange. He held onto the medkit in his lap. The impact was a jarring, bone-rattling crash. The pod plowed through alien foliage, finally coming to a violent stop against a massive tree with bark that pulsed with a soft blue light. Silence followed. Only the sound of his own breathing and the creak of cooling metal. He unbuckled himself. Every muscle ached. He checked himself for major injuries. Bruises, maybe a cracked rib. Nothing critical. The pod's hatch was jammed. He had to kick it 3 times before it groaned open. Coppery-tanged air flooded in, thick and humid. He crawled out, medkit in hand, and stood on the alien soil. He was alone. His pod was the only one he could see. The jungle hummed and glowed around him, alive and utterly unconcerned with his survival. He took a slow breath. The air tasted of metal and something else, something sharp and coppery that coated his tongue. Not poison. Not immediately. He scanned the immediate area. His own pod had carved a deep furrow in the jungle floor, tearing through thick, rubbery vines that leaked a faint, milky sap. He checked the medkit. Seals were intact. Basic supplies all present. The humidity was immediate and total. It settled on his skin like a second layer, warm and heavy. The air shimmered with it. Around him, the jungle pulsed. Leaves glowed with their own soft light, shifting through shades of blue and violet. Strange flowers shaped like trumpets throbbed with a gentle rhythm. It felt like standing inside a living creature. He moved cautiously, every sense alert. Then he saw it. 100 meters away, partly obscured by giant ferns with iridescent fronds, another escape pod. It hadn't fared as well as his. It looked like it had hit a rock formation and tumbled. One side was completely crushed. The hatch was a mangled ruin. No signs of movement. He activated his medical scanner. The device whirred softly in his hand, its screen casting a pale green light on his face. It swept the area, finding nothing at first, then a faint signal, Weak but there. A life sign. It was coming from the wrecked pod. He moved toward it, his boots sinking into the soft, mossy ground. The scanner's readings made no sense. The vitals were all wrong. The heart rate was a complex, layered rhythm. Body temperature registered far lower than human standard. The biosignature was completely unfamiliar. He approached the crushed pod slowly. The metal was twisted. He could see inside through a gap in the torn hull. A figure was pinned under a collapsed bulkhead. He knelt, peering into the dim interior. The scanner's signal grew stronger. It wasn't one heartbeat. It was four. Four distinct, synchronized rhythms registering on his screen. His training offered no precedent for this. The figure moved slightly. A low sound like a sigh. He saw her then. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and it glowed. Not a uniform light, but intricate patterns that shifted across her arms and face like flowing water. Luminous markings traced paths over her skin, swirling and fading. She was trapped from the waist down, a massive piece of the bulkhead across her legs. Her eyes opened. They were a solid, deep violet with no discernible pupil or iris. She looked at him, at the medkit in his hand. There was no fear in her gaze, only a sharp, assessing clarity even through the pain. Her voice was soft but clear, translated by a small device on her collar. It held a strange melodic quality. "I am Niara," she said. The words were measured. "Medical officer, 3rd rank, my kid is compromised. I require assistance," she stated it, a simple fact. An offer of her expertise, not a plea for her life. She was still trying to do her job, even pinned under a ton of wreckage on an alien world. Morgan just stared, the scanner still humming in his hand, registering 4 steady alien heartbeats. Morgan got to work. He placed the medkit on a flat piece of wreckage and opened it. The contents were orderly, familiar. He pulled out the portable scanner and ran it over Niara's lower body. The machine hummed, its light painting her trapped leg in a pale blue grid. The results made him pause. The display showed a complex system of 4 circulatory nodes, not a single heart, working in a staggered, synchronized rhythm to pump a pale, silvery fluid. Each node pulsed with a different overlapping timing, creating a biological harmony he'd never seen. Her leg was a mess. The bulkhead had crushed it at the mid-femur. The scanner's density readings were off the charts. He adjusted the calibration, thinking it was a malfunction. It wasn't. Her skeletal structure registered as a crystallized calcium silicate matrix. It was harder than human bone, with a complex lattice that fractured in geometric patterns instead of simple breaks. Standard human bone fusion protocols. The staples and sonic welders in his kit were useless. They were designed for organic calcium phosphate. This was like trying to fix a diamond with wood glue. He looked from his equipment to her leg. An antiseptic spray, pain inhibitors, coagulant foam, all formulated for human biochemistry. His entire training, his years of field medicine, were suddenly a library of wrong answers. Every protocol was a dead end. He had to think in fundamentals. Pressure, stabilization, preventing systemic shock. But even those basics were on shifting ground. Niara watched him. Her luminous skin patterns flickered, a rapid, agitated flow of light that mirrored her pain. She spoke, her voice tight but clear. "The nodes require balanced pressure," she said. "A drop in one. The others compensate. But the strain..." She took a shallow breath. "Our structural integrity is different. The crystalline lattice redirects force. It does not bend. It shatters." He listened, his hands moving on their own, prepping a basic field tourniquet above the injury site. It was a stopgap. He needed to get the weight off her leg. He found a multi-tool and a hydraulic jack in his kit's emergency compartment. He began carefully positioning the jack under the edge of the bulkhead. It was slow work. Every shift of the metal drew a sharp hiss from her. "Your equipment is for softer beings," she stated, not as an accusation but an observation. She was diagnosing her own problem through his limitations. "Your analgesics would be neurotoxins to me. Your coagulants would create blockages in our circulatory web." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. The reality of the situation settled on him. This wasn't a matter of adapting a known procedure. He wasn't practicing medicine as he understood it. He was a pioneer stumbling through completely unknown biological territory. Every decision was a hypothesis. Every action was an experiment. "What do you call your people?" he asked, his voice low. He needed to ground this in something, a name, a category. The light patterns on her skin slowed, softening. "We are Lysathian," she said. The word held weight. It was the first piece of a new map. He stored it away. Lysathian. It meant nothing to him, and yet now it meant everything. The jack creaked as he applied more pressure. Millimeter by careful millimeter. The science started there. He kept working the hydraulic jack. The metal groaned, but gave another centimeter. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mingling with the humid alien air. He needed to keep her talking, keep her conscious. "Your people," he began, his voice steady with effort. "The Lysathians. You have medical training, standard for your crews?" It was a practical question. He was assessing her, as he would any colleague in the field. Niara's luminous patterns shifted, a slow, dark flow of indigo. "Training is universal," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of pride. "We are all trained. It is a requirement of our utility." The word landed heavily. Utility, not purpose, not vocation. He paused, his hand on the jack handle. He looked at her. Her violet eyes were fixed on the canopy above, but she wasn't seeing the glowing leaves. "Utility for whom?" "The ones who find our durability advantageous." She spoke without bitterness. It was a recitation of fact. "Our skeletal density allows work in high-pressure environments. Our multinodal circulation provides resilience to toxins and trauma. We do not break easily. We are efficient to maintain. This makes us valuable assets for subsurface mining, hazardous construction, deep space salvage." She listed the applications like items on a manifest. "They do not send their own people into such places. They send us." The jack creaked again. He increased the pressure slowly, carefully. "They, many species. The coalition included in your earlier expansion phases." Her gaze finally met his. There was no accusation in it, just a weary knowledge. "You needed miners for the thorium veins on Xerxes too. The radiation levels were catastrophic for your biology, acceptable for ours. You needed construction teams for the orbital platforms around black hole mining operations. The gravitational shearing forces would liquefy a human. We could endure it for a time." He stopped. The history of the Coalition's frontier expansion was a point of pride in the Academy texts. They spoke of innovation, of triumph over hostile environments. They never specified the cost or who exactly had paid it. A cold knot formed in his stomach. 17,412, she said quietly. The number was precise. It had been counted. Lost in a single subsurface evacuation on Malachi. A tectonic event. The corporate overseers sealed the upper shafts. Preserved the equipment. They did not attempt retrieval. We were listed as damaged equipment. Expendable. The light on her skin dimmed, the pattern slowing to a mournful crawl. Morgan looked at his hands, at the human-designed medkit. He thought of the countless ethical protocols drilled into him. The prime directive of his profession, first do no harm. He understood, with a sudden sickening clarity, that he was likely the first human to ever treat a Lysathian as a patient instead of a piece of equipment. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, heavier than the metal he was trying to lift. This was no longer a rescue. It was a reckoning. His tone changed. The brisk clinical distance evaporated. "Tell me about the pressure points around the fracture," he said. "Where are the major nerve clusters I need to avoid?" He wasn't ordering. He was asking. He was consulting a fellow expert. Niara's patterns brightened slightly, a flicker of amber. She began to speak, her voice gaining a new focused intensity. She detailed the pathways of her own nervous system, the vulnerabilities of the crystalline lattice. The exchange was no longer between a rescuer and a victim. It was a consultation between two medical officers. The shared ground wasn't just the muddy soil of an alien world. It was the bedrock of ethics, of valuing a life for its own sake. The history was there, a dark shadow between them. But for the first time, someone was choosing to step out of it. The leg had to come free. That was the only clear fact. The bulkhead had crushed it completely. The crystalline bone structure had shattered into a web of fractures. Trying to set it under the weight was impossible. Morgan had the hydraulic jack positioned, but it wouldn't lift the entire section. He needed to cut her out. He opened his kit and laid out the bone saw, the clamps, the laser cauterizer. Standard human issue. None of it was made for crystallized silicate lattice. "This is going to be like trying to cut diamond with a butter knife," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He picked up the bone saw. Its micro-serrated blade was designed for human bone density. He powered it on. It whined against the air. He touched it to a small exposed fragment of her bone. The sound was wrong. A high-pitched shriek of protest. The blade skittered off the surface, barely scratching it. Useless. Niara watched, her luminous patterns flickering with each painful breath. The matrix resonates at a different frequency, she said, her voice strained but analytical. Your tool vibrates too slowly. It cannot find purchase. You need to alter the waveform. Increase the oscillation by 47%, she wasn't guessing. She was reading the failure of his tool through her own body's feedback. Morgan looked from the saw to her. He trusted her, he had to. He found the tool's calibration port and patched in his med scanner. He used its interface to rewrite the saw's motor control algorithm, increasing the oscillation rate as she'd instructed. The saw's whine climbed to a new, almost inaudible pitch. He tried it again. This time the blade bit in. It sent a fine, crystalline dust into the air, sparkling under the jungle's glow. It was slow, careful work. The sound was like grinding glass. The tension was a physical thing in the air, thick as the humidity. Morgan kept his hand steady, his focus absolute. You know, he said, his voice low and conversational over the whine of the tool. Back in basic med training, they told us the most important tool was a steady hand. I think they forgot to mention the part where your patient gives you the user manual for their skeleton. It was dry, almost grim humor, a way to bleed off the immense pressure. Niara's light pattern shifted, a slow ripple of what might have been amusement. Our training emphasizes anatomical precision. Knowing one's own schematics is a primary lesson. It increases survival probability when others are not. Equipped to assist. He worked, following her quiet, precise instructions, a little more to the left. The primary neural bundle runs there. Avoid it. He adjusted his angle. She guided him through the strange geography of her own body, a cartographer of her flesh and bone. He wasn't a surgeon performing a procedure. He was a technician, and she was the expert guiding his hands. It was a complete reversal of every field manual he'd ever read. Finally, with a last precise cut, the leg was free of the crushing weight. The fractured ends of the bone were exposed, glittering with sharp geometric edges. He set the saw down. Now for stabilization. The human bone welder was next. Again, he had to recalibrate its energy output based on her instructions, tuning it to the specific resonant frequency of her crystalline structure. He applied the emitter. A soft, deep hum filled the space. The fractured edges of the bone glowed with an internal warm light, then began to knit together, fusing into a solid, if scarred, whole. He sat back on his heels, breathing out slowly. The procedure was done. The leg was stabilized. He looked at Niara. She looked back at him. There was no fanfare, no celebration, just the shared, quiet knowledge of what they had just done. It wasn't a human saving an alien. It was the first recorded instance of a human and a Lysathian collaborating to solve a medical problem. A small thing, in the grand scheme of a crashing ship and a deadly planet. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered. He reached for her hand. It was an automatic gesture born of human instinct, a way to offer comfort during the final uncomfortable phase of the bone fusion. The emitter hummed, sealing the crystallized fracture. Her skin was cool to the touch. He expected a brief grip of gratitude, a moment of shared relief and then release. Her fingers closed around his. They were slender, strong. The grip was firm. It was not the desperate clutch of a patient in pain. It was deliberate, purposeful. She did not let go. He waited. The emitter finished its cycle and powered down. The jungle sounds returned to the foreground. Still, her hand remained locked with his. It felt less like holding and more like connecting. Then he felt it. A strange sensation traveled up his arm. It wasn't electricity. It was subtler. A low hum of energy. A vibration that seemed to bypass his skin and resonate directly in his nerves. It was a feeling of alignment, like two systems clicking into sync. His own heartbeat, a single steady thump, felt suddenly loud and simple next to the complex four-part rhythm he could now feel pulsing through her hand into his. He looked at her. Her luminous patterns were flowing in slow, serene waves, a calm mirror of the energy he felt. "You feel it," she stated. It wasn't a question. Her violet eyes watched him, seeing his confusion, his lack of understanding. "What is it?" His voice was low. He made no move to pull his hand away. The connection was too strange, too profound to break. "Neural synchronization," she explained. Her tone was clinical. Yet there was a softness to it he hadn't heard before. It is a physiological response, not conscious. It occurs in my species during moments of extreme duress or profound trust. The nervous system seeks external stabilization. It attempts to harmonize with another nearby system to regulate itself, to share the cognitive load. Morgan let the words settle. His medical training scrambled for a reference point. There was none. This was beyond psychology, beyond empathy. This was biology. Hard, tangible science happening in the space between their hands. His own stress levels, which had been a constant tight knot in his chest since the ship broke apart, began to ease. Not because the danger was gone, but because the sensation was being shared. Diluted across two minds, he could feel the sharp edge of his own fear softening, blending with her cooler, more analytical calm. For you, it is likely unprecedented, she continued. Your species is more contained, isolated. For us, it is a natural survival mechanism, a way to not endure a crisis alone. What had begun as a simple gesture of human comfort had become something else entirely. It was a data stream, a biological handshake. He was no longer just a doctor assessing a patient's vitals on a screen. He was feeling them. The line between them had blurred. The professional distance he'd maintained, the wall between medic and patient, dissolved in that steady grip. They were two beings in a jungle, and a fundamental barrier had just fallen without a sound. The act of holding a hand had transformed from a comfort into a discovery, and in doing so it had quietly redefined their entire relationship. They were connected now in a way his training had never prepared him for. The connection was not static. It was a live current, a subtle flow of information that moved beneath the surface of his skin. Morgan held Niara's hand, and the sensation deepened from a simple hum to a cascade of unfamiliar input. It wasn't thoughts, not in words. It was emotion, pure and unfiltered. A wave of her pain washed into him, not as a described symptom but as a sharp, localized ache in his own thigh. Along with it came a layer of profound fatigue, the deep weariness of a body pushed to its absolute limit. Then, flickers of imagery, a memory of cool, dark halls, the feeling of smooth stone underfoot, a complex scent like ozone and crushed herbs. They were not his memories. They were hers. Fragments of her life, bleeding across the neural link. He didn't hear her speak. He knew. He felt her gratitude for his steady hands, her analytical assessment of her own injury's severity, her quiet focus on maintaining the connection. The synchronization had created a channel of shared perception that bypassed language entirely. It was more intimate than conversation. It was truth, without the filter of words. It is an old thing for my people, Niara said aloud, her voice a quiet anchor in the strange tide of shared sensation. A biological imperative. In moments of extreme vulnerability, we seek to share the burden of consciousness. To not be alone in the experience, it regulates system shock, distributes the cognitive load. Her explanation was calm, a scientist describing a known phenomenon. For Morgan, it was anything but known. It was a complete neurological upheaval. His human brain, wired for isolation, for the sanctity of the individual mind, was adapting in real time. He was processing input from a second nervous system, interpreting alien biochemistry as feeling and memory. Every medical text he had ever studied was silent on this. There was no protocol for shared consciousness, no framework for a diagnosis you could feel in your own body. They began to test it, carefully. He would focus on a question, a query about the level of pain at the fracture site. Instead of waiting for her to formulate an answer, he would feel a corresponding pulse of sensation in his own leg, a clear, unambiguous signal. He would project a feeling of reassurance, a deliberate calm, and watch as the agitated patterns on her skin would slow and soften in response. It was a two-way circuit, a silent, constant exchange. The implications for medicine were staggering. Diagnosis was no longer a process of external observation, of interpreting scans and vitals and patient descriptions. It became a shared experience. He could feel the inflammation receding at the injury site as a lessening of a hot, throbbing pressure in his own perception. He could sense the precise moment her 4 circulatory nodes achieved a stable, balanced rhythm. It was like reading a book by living the story. The link was more than a medical tool, though. It was profoundly personal. The wall between them was gone. He wasn't just treating her. He was, in some tangible way, with her. The isolation of the crash, the terror of the unknown world, it all lessened. The burden was halved. The connection transformed their dynamic from a rescue into a partnership, grounded in a shared sensory reality that neither could have imagined hours before. It was the most useful and the most unnerving thing he had ever experienced. The crash site was not safe. They both knew it. The torn metal and scattered debris would draw predators. The fading light would only make things worse. Morgan moved first. He checked Niara's leg brace. It was holding. She could not walk, but she could move with support. He helped her to a standing position against a tree with pulsing bark. Her weight was light, her movements precise. She was not a burden. She was a partner with a mobility issue. He went to the wreckage of the 2 pods. His own was relatively intact. The other was a shattered mess. He worked quickly, pulling panels of alloy plating from the hulls. He salvaged a length of support beam, a section of the less damaged hatch. It was crude work. He was building a child's fort with the bones of a starship. The materials were advanced. The construction was primitive. He dragged the pieces to a small clearing he'd spotted, a slightly raised area surrounded by thick, rubbery ferns. The jungle watched. It pulsed and sang. The sounds were not animal. They were like liquid crystal being poured over resonant metal, a melodic chiming cacophony that came from everywhere at once. The air itself felt alive, thick with copper-cinnamon moisture and the faint, sparkling mist of airborne spores. The environment was no longer just a setting. It was a participant, a silent, watching entity that dictated the terms of their survival. Niara directed him from her position. Angle that panel to deflect ground moisture. The soil here will become saturated. Her knowledge was practical, born of a life spent in harsh environments. He followed her instructions. They built the shelter together, him with his hands, her with her voice. It was a low, 3-sided lean-to made of curved hull plates, with the salvaged hatch as a rough door. It wouldn't keep out a determined predator, but it would break the wind. It would create an illusion of safety, and sometimes that was enough. As the last of the chartreuse light faded from the canopy, true darkness fell. It was not complete blackness. The jungle provided its own illumination. Leaves glowed with a soft blue-white radiance. Fungal growths on the tree trunks pulsed with a slow green rhythm. It was minimal light, but it was light. They could see each other's faces in the faint, shifting glow. Inside the cramped space, their conversation changed. The immediate medical crisis was over. The silence that followed was different. It was filled with the alien symphony of the night. Morgan sat with his back against the cold metal wall. Niara leaned against the other side, her legs stretched out carefully. "We build to survive," she said, her voice quiet in the dark. "But the purpose shifts. First, it is only for the body. Then, if you are fortunate, it becomes for the mind." She was not talking about the shelter anymore. Morgan looked at the crude walls around them. "We make a space, then we decide what to put in it." It was the most philosophical thing he'd said all day. The professional distance was completely gone. They were just 2 beings in the dark, talking about why they built walls. The shelter was more than a collection of scrap metal. It was the first thing they had made together. It was a shared decision, a collaborative effort. It marked the definitive end of the rescue. He was no longer the savior, and she the saved. They were partners. Their survival was now a joint project. The simple act of building a roof over their heads had cemented that shift. They had created a small pocket of safety in the infinite unknown, and they had done it together. The first true night on Luminina 60s fell with a deepening of the ambient hum. The melodic chiming of the jungle did not cease. It changed. The notes grew lower, more resonant. The darkness was not complete. It was a tapestry of shifting bioluminescence, a landscape of soft blues and greens that threw long, moving shadows. Then came a new sound, a low, subsonic thrum that vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. It was the sound of something large moving through the dense undergrowth, something that did not care about stealth. Morgan froze. He was at the edge of the clearing, checking the perimeter of their makeshift shelter. He saw it first as an absence of light, a patch of darkness that was too deep, too absolute, sliding between two glowing trees. It was fluid, a shifting form that seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. It had no distinct shape, no eyes, no limbs. It was a living shadow moving with a predatory liquid grace. Then another appeared, and another. They were drawn to the light, specifically to their light, to the soft glow of the shelter's metallic walls, and more acutely, to the inherent bioluminescence of Niara's skin. She was a beacon in the dark. "Void hunters," Niara said from inside the shelter. Her voice was tight but controlled. She had already identified the threat. "They track bioelectric signatures. My physiology. It draws them. They are apex predators here." She was not just a target. She was the preferred prey. One of the shadows detached from the tree line and flowed toward the shelter. It moved silently, a blot of absolute blackness against the neon-dappled ground. Morgan felt a cold dread grip him. He had a laser cutter, a few ration packets. Nothing for a fight. Then light erupted from the shelter's entrance. A concentrated beam of raw plasma energy, brilliant white and buzzing with heat, lanced out from Niara's position. She had salvaged a damaged power cell from the wreckage and jury-rigged it into a crude emitter. The beam struck the leading Void Hunter. The creature did not scream. It shimmered, its form destabilizing, and then dissipated into a cloud of iridescent, sparkling mist. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic. The attack was not a panicked shot. It was precise, aimed. It spoke of combat training far beyond standard medical protocol. Morgan didn't question it, he moved. He grabbed a curved piece of hull plating, a makeshift shield, and positioned himself at the shelter's other side. He had no weapon, so he improvised. He began striking the metal shield with a piece of debris. The sharp, clanging noise was utterly alien in the organic soundscape of the jungle. It was a human distraction, a primitive tactic to draw attention. Their neural link ignited. He didn't need to tell her his plan. She felt his intention the moment he thought it. As he created a racket on one side, she focused her fire on the other. A second hunter, drawn by the noise, was caught in her plasma beam and vanished. Their coordination was seamless, wordless. He would sense a shift in the hunter's focus through their connection, a predatory intent, and he would move, creating a new disturbance. She would fire exactly where he directed the attention. It was a dance, a deadly improvised ballet against formless shadows. The attack tested more than their tactics. It tested their nerve. Morgan felt Niara's focused calm bleed into him, steadying his own racing heart. She in turn drew on his raw, stubborn determination. They were not two individuals fighting separate battles. They were a single unit, a shared consciousness operating two bodies. The courage required was a pooled resource. The last hunter lingered at the edge of the light, a coalescence of hungry darkness. Then, as if deciding the reward was not worth the risk, it melted back into the deeper jungle. The subsonic thrum faded. Silence returned, broken only by the now familiar chimes and their own harsh breathing. The shared tension did not break. It transformed. It solidified into something new. They had faced a direct threat not as a rescuer and a victim, but as partners. Their solidarity was no longer theoretical. It was forged in plasma fire, and the silent understanding that neither would have survived alone. The partnership had just been proven in the only way that truly mattered. It worked. The attack began not with a roar, but with a deepening silence. The first Void Hunter flowed from the shadows, a patch of living darkness that drank the light. As it moved, the neural link between Morgan and Niara did not just hold. It ignited. The steady hum of connection surged into a live wire of shared consciousness. It was no longer a gentle stream of emotion. It was a flood. Morgan's own fear was a cold knot in his stomach. But it was immediately overshadowed by a wave of foreign data. He felt a clarity that was not his own. It was Niara's combat instinct, a library of reflexive knowledge flooding into his mind. He saw flashes of memory not as images but as felt experiences. The precise angle of a defensive stance, the calculated trajectory of an energy weapon, the specific muscle groups used to brace for an impact. His own human reactions felt slow, clumsy next to this refined, inherited expertise. He was feeling her training, her history of survival, as if it were his own. Her body reacted in turn. The soft, flowing patterns on her skin flared. The gentle blues and violets sharpened into brilliant, determined whites and ambers. It was not a display of panic. It was a focusing of resources, a biological weapon system coming online. The light was a side effect of immense cognitive and physiological effort. He felt that effort as a humming vibration through their link, a sense of absolute focus that was more vivid and immediate than his own scrambling fear. Her emotions, a cool, analytical assessment of the threat, a precise calculation of risk, were clearer to him than his own jumbled terror. This was the turning point. The synchronization stopped being a curious phenomenon and became a tactical engine. They moved. He did not need to speak his plan to create a diversion. The intention formed in his mind, and she knew it instantly. Her plasma emitter already tracking to cover his movement. He sensed the Void Hunter's shifting attention through her perception, a subtle change in its bioelectric field, and he struck the hull plate a fraction of a second before it lunged. Their coordination was perfect, flawless. It was not two people fighting together. It was one mind operating two bodies with terrifying efficiency. The link was their command center, their comms network, their shared targeting computer. When the last hunter retreated, the immediate danger passed. But the connection did not break. It did not settle back to its previous state. The neural pathway, forced wide open by the adrenaline and the shared fight, remained. The intense, vibrant flow of shared sensation did not ebb. It simply changed key, from the high-intensity strain of combat to a lower, steadier hum of mutual awareness. He could still feel the four-part rhythm of her hearts, the slight ache in her leg, the calm post-threat analysis running through her mind. It was all there, a constant, quiet background presence in his own consciousness. The crisis had done more than test their partnership. It had welded it shut at a fundamental level. The neural link was no longer a temporary state induced by trauma. It was a permanent fixture, a new reality. They had faced the Void Hunters not as individuals, but as a united entity. In doing so, they had crossed a threshold. They could not go back to being separate. The connection was cemented. They had become something new, something that could only exist because two different beings had chosen, in the face of absolute danger, to not be alone. They were an integrated system now, a partnership forged in the dark, made permanent by the fight to survive it. The immediate danger had passed. The Void Hunters had retreated into the deeper jungle. The shelter held. Now the real work began. Niara's leg was stabilized, but the inflammation was setting in. The skin around the fracture was swollen, the normal lavender hue of her flesh darkening to a deep, painful-looking plum. The intricate patterns of light that flowed across her skin were sluggish, dimmed by the systemic shock. She needed treatment. Morgan opened his medkit. He pulled out a standard anti-inflammatory injector, a common piece of human field gear. He pressed it against her arm. The fluid entered her system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her entire body went rigid. A sharp, shared jolt of pain shot through the neural link into Morgan. Her four circulatory nodes spasmed erratically. He snatched the injector away. The human medication wasn't just ineffective. It was a toxin to her. His entire arsenal of drugs was a collection of potential poisons. He had nothing to give her. No tool, no drug, no protocol. The frustration was a cold stone in his gut. Then the link provided the answer. It wasn't a voice. It was a sensation, a pulling, a subtle, guiding feeling that directed his attention away from the medkit and out toward the jungle itself. He felt Niara's awareness, her intimate knowledge of her own strange body, reaching out. It was as if she was using their connection to show him what she needed. She couldn't name a compound, but she could feel the resonance of something out there that would harmonize with her biology, something that would cool the fire in her leg. He helped her to the edge of the shelter. The jungle pulsed around them, a living pharmacy of glowing plants and singing flora. Niara pointed to a cluster of broad, fern-like leaves that emitted a soft, pulsing blue light. "There," she said, her voice weak. "The resonance is clean, calming." Morgan collected samples. He used his scanner, but its human-centric database recognized nothing. He had to rely on her. She would touch a leaf, and through their link he would feel a corresponding sensation, a coolness, a reduction in the throbbing ache. She was the bioscanner. Her body was the laboratory. They cataloged 3 different plants. One reduced inflammation. Another promoted cellular regeneration specific to her crystallized bone matrix. A third seemed to act as a powerful analgesic for her unique nervous system. Morgan's role shifted completely. He was no longer the lone medic making heroic decisions. He was a technician, a chemist. He used his tools to extract compounds, to grind leaves into pastes, to carefully mix them based on the feedback flowing through the neural link. He could feel which molecular configurations would be most effective, a precision that no machine could ever provide. He was cooking, guided by a recipe written in sensation. He applied the first poultice to her leg. The effect was immediate and visible through their shared perception. The angry hot pressure in the fracture site began to recede like a tide going out. The dark plum coloration of her skin faded, slowly returning to its natural healthy lavender. The patterns of light on her skin, which had been so slow and dim, brightened. They began to flow in their normal, serene rhythm. The improvement was rapid, tangible. It was a complete medical success, achieved with nothing from his kit and everything from their partnership. This was not a human saving an alien. This was the first true cross-species medical treatment in recorded history. It was not done by a doctor following a manual. It was done by 2 medical officers from 2 different worlds using a biological link to bridge the impossible gap between their sciences. Morgan's practice had been transformed. He had moved from isolated heroism to collaborative science. The healing was no longer something he did to her. It was something they accomplished together. The proof was in the quiet calm that settled over them both, and in the returning light on her skin. The neural link opened a second set of senses. For Morgan, the jungle had been a collection of threats and resources, a thing to be survived. Now, through the constant quiet hum of his connection to Niara, he began to perceive it as she did. It was not a place. It was a system, a vast breathing network of interconnected life. He didn't just see the glowing leaves. He felt their slow rhythmic pulses as part of a larger pattern, a silent communication between plants. The strange chiming calls of the unseen fauna were no longer random noise. They were a language of location, of territory, of mating calls and warnings. He could almost feel the meaning in the vibrations. The environment lost its menacing randomness. It gained a terrible, beautiful logic. His human mind had categorized. It had listed dangers and assets. Hurley-Sathian perception synthesized. It saw relationships, flows of energy, cause and effect. This new understanding changed everything about their survival. He stopped thinking about fortifying their position against the jungle. He started thinking about aligning with it. They noticed that the void hunters never approached areas where a specific type of pulsing moss grew. It wasn't a coincidence. The moss emitted a low-frequency vibration the predators avoided. They gathered some, placing it around their shelter. It was better than a weapon. It was a deterrent. They learned to read the jungle's signs. A certain shift in the bioluminescent patterns of the canopy overhead signaled an approaching weather front of acidic mist. They had time to seal the shelter. The frantic, high-pitched chiming from a particular grove meant a large herbivore was passing through, which often drew the hunters. They knew to be still and quiet. Their strategy shifted from brute force opposition to intelligent integration. They were learning the rules of the world they were in, not fighting against them. Their partnership became the living embodiment of this new worldview. Just as the jungle was a network of interdependent life, they had become a single, integrated unit. His human analytical skills combined with her holistic perception created a hybrid intelligence. It was stronger than the sum of its parts. They were no longer 2 individuals trying to conquer an environment. They were a new kind of entity, learning to live within one. The alien world, which had been an impenetrable, hostile mystery, began to make sense. It became comprehensible not through human science or Lysithian science, but through the shared perception they had created together. They could predict, they could adapt, they could find water by following the specific root systems Niara could feel through the soil. They could avoid dangerous fauna by reading the warning signs in the altered calls of the smaller life forms. The world had a manual. They were finally learning to read it. This was the fundamental shift. First contact was not about 2 species meeting. It was about 2 ways of seeing the universe meeting. And from that collision, a third way was born. A perspective that could see the connections between things, that could understand a world not as a collection of objects to be used, but as a web of life to be understood. Their survival was no longer a matter of luck or grit. It was a testament to this new way of being. They were working with the world, and in doing so, the world began to work with them. The signal cut through the jungle's hum, sharp and artificial. A repeating coalition emergency channel. Rescue ships were en route. ETA 12 hours. The sound should have been a relief. It wasn't. Morgan felt the shift in Niara immediately through their link. Her quiet calm tightened into a knot of cold dread. Her luminous skin patterns, which had been flowing in serene waves, contracted into hard, still points of light. Salvation was coming, and it was going to tear them apart. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on some middle distance, seeing a future he could only guess at. "They will separate us," she said. Her voice was flat. It was not a question. It is protocol. For study. For decontamination. For assessment. They have forms for everything except this. She gestured briefly at the space between them, at the invisible thread of the neural link. They will see a phenomenon. A thing to be understood, contained, controlled. They will not see us. Morgan knew she was right. He knew the manuals. First contact protocol was a stack of regulations a meter high. Isolate the parties. Independent medical exams. Separate debriefings. Psychological evaluation. The system was designed for control, for risk mitigation. It was a machine built to process the unknown into neat, manageable categories. Their connection, this profound neural synchronization, would not fit in any category. It would be a specimen. A data set. He pictured sterile white rooms, scanners, teams of specialists observing them through glass. They would be pulled apart to see how the mechanism worked. The very bond that had saved them would be dismantled by the people sent to save them. He thought of her history. The Lysotheans, valued for utility, treated as durable equipment. The coalition had done it before. They would do it again. The cold logic of the bureaucracy was impeccable. Study the link. Replicate it. Weaponize it for tactical advantage. Use it for interrogation. The potential applications were endless. And in that process, the partnership, the trust, the shared consciousness that had grown between them would be destroyed. It was too fragile to survive the machinery of institutional curiosity. The rescue ships were not coming to save them. They were coming to retrieve them, to process them. The jungle, for all its dangers, had been a place of freedom. It had allowed them to become something new. The coalition would force them back into old boxes: soldier, alien, subject, object. He looked at Niara. He felt her resignation through the link. It was a heavy, weary weight. She had expected nothing else. This was how it always ended for her people. Used, then stored away. The neural link hummed between them. A constant reminder of what they would lose. It wasn't just a connection, it was a shared self. To sever it would be a kind of death. The rescue was not salvation. It was the threat. It forced a choice he had never thought he'd have to make. The choice between the rules he had sworn to follow and the person he had become alongside her. The system he represented was about to demand he break the most important thing he had ever helped build. The rescue shuttle's ramp lowered with a pressurized hiss. Commander Ishida stood there, crisp uniform, face set in the standard expression of professional concern. Beside him, Dr. Zelton held a med scanner, his eyes already analyzing the neural link readings with clinical hunger. They represented the system. The rulebook. The end of everything Morgan and Niara had built. The formalities began: status reports, debrief protocols, the standard script for a first contact survival scenario. Ishida's gaze moved from Morgan to Niara. Standard procedure requires immediate separation for medical and psychological evaluation. The neural phenomenon you're exhibiting is a clear containment level event. We'll need to run a full battery of tests. His tone was neutral. It was just policy, a problem to be processed. The machinery was starting up. Morgan felt Niara's stillness through the link. It was the calm of someone who had always expected the boot to fall. Morgan didn't argue the point. He changed the game. Separation would be medically counterproductive, he stated. His voice was level. He wasn't a junior officer anymore. He was a field medic reporting facts. The synchronization is a stable condition. It's not a malfunction. It's an asset. We've already used it to achieve the first successful cross-species medical treatment in recorded history. You're not looking at a problem to be contained. You're looking at the future of interstellar medicine. Ishida's expression didn't change. That's a significant claim, medical officer. One that requires verification under controlled conditions. The protocols are clear. The protocols are for situations you understand, Morgan countered. This is new. We have a functional partnership here. A working model. Tearing it apart to study the pieces will destroy the very thing you want to understand. There's a better way. He took a breath. This was the line. I'm proposing an interspecies medical exchange program. Formalize this. Make us the first participants. Use us. Let us continue the work we've started. The strategic value isn't in dissecting this link. It's in applying it. Dr. Zelton looked up from his scanner, intrigued despite himself. The data flow is remarkable. The diagnostic potential alone. Ishida remained rigid. The bureaucratic framework for such a program doesn't exist. The diplomatic implications with the Lysathian conclave are untested. The risk assessment would be, the risk of doing nothing is greater, Morgan said. We crashed. We survived. We made a breakthrough. The universe handed us a tool. Throwing it away because the paperwork is complicated isn't caution, it's fear. He wasn't pleading. He was stating a tactical reality. He had shifted from defending their connection to advocating for it. He was no longer following the rules. He was proposing new ones. Ishida was silent for a long moment. He looked at them, not as specimens but as two officers from two species standing together. The neural link hummed between them, a visible tension in the air. The documentation would be nightmarish, Ishida finally said, his voice losing some of its official edge. I have excellent penmanship, Morgan replied, a dry hint of his old self showing through, and a high tolerance for bureaucracy. It's practically a prerequisite for medical certification. The commander almost smiled. It was a tiny crack in the facade. The proposal was on the table. It was radical. It was uncharted. But it was also practical. It offered a path forward that wasn't destruction. Morgan had stopped asking for permission to break the rules. He had started writing new ones. He had become an advocate, and for the first time the system hesitated. Commander Ishida's face was a mask of bureaucratic calculation. The proposal hung in the air between them, a radical departure from every rulebook. He saw a containment nightmare, a diplomatic minefield, a stack of paperwork that would reach the ceiling. Dr. Zelton, however, saw the data. His scanner was still humming, its screen displaying the intricate dance of the neural synchronization. He saw a medical breakthrough, a diagnostic tool of unprecedented precision. The two perspectives clashed in the humid air. The evidence was the only thing that could break the deadlock. Morgan didn't argue theory. He presented results. He detailed the cross-species treatments. The anti-inflammatory poultice derived from local flora, calibrated through the neural link to cool the inflammation in Niara's crystallized bone. The analgesic compound that worked on her unique nervous system. These weren't hypotheticals. They were documented successes, achieved with zero standard medical supplies. They were impossible, and yet they had happened. The practical value was undeniable. It was a new branch of medicine, and they were the only practitioners. The link itself offered another kind of value. Ishida's mind, trained for strategy, began to see past the medical applications, a communication system that bypassed language, that allowed for the direct transfer of complex concepts and real-time tactical coordination. It was an intelligence officer's dream, a diplomat's ultimate tool, the potential to understand an alien species not through imperfect translation, but through shared perception. The risk of the unknown began to be outweighed by the sheer utility of the thing. A new signal chirped on Ishida's comm unit. The Lysathian conclave had been monitoring the situation. Their response was not one of alarm or a demand for repatriation. It was an expression of interest. They too saw the strategic value. They recognized the partnership not as a contamination, but as an opportunity. Their people's history was one of being used. This was different. This was collaboration, a chance to be a founding partner in something new, rather than a tool for someone else's project. The shared interest from both sides changed the equation entirely. The balance finally tipped. The concrete gains, the medical breakthroughs, the communication advantages, the mutual diplomatic interest, proved heavier than the abstract fear of the unknown. The rigid framework of protocol had to bend. It did not break. The approval came, but it came with conditions. Constant monitoring, regular reports, a 3-year commitment to the newly formed Interspecies Medical Exchange Program. It was a compromise. They would not be separated and dissected. They would be observed, studied, but allowed to continue their work. They would be pioneers, not lab specimens. Systems, no matter how rigid, can adapt when confronted with something too valuable to destroy. The bureaucracy absorbed the shock of their innovation and found a way to make it fit, creating a new category just for them. This decision did more than save their partnership. It created a precedent. It proved that the first response to the unknown didn't have to be isolation and control. It could be integration and study. It opened a door. Future interspecies collaborations would now have a model to follow. A path that had been carved out by a medic and his partner who refused to let go. 3 weeks later, they stood on the observation deck of the Lysathian Science Station, looking down at the world that had nearly killed them. Luminina 60s hung in the blackness below, a swirling marble of neon green and deep violet. The jungle that had felt so immense and threatening from the ground was now a silent, beautiful pattern. The station itself was a masterpiece of alien engineering, all smooth, flowing lines and soft ambient light, a stark contrast to the angular, utilitarian design of coalition vessels. They had been given quarters, assignments, a schedule. Life had found a new normal. But the normal was anything but ordinary. Skepticism was a quiet undercurrent on the station. Some coalition personnel watched them with sidelong glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. The neural link was a known quantity now, but not an accepted one. It made people uncomfortable. It blurred lines they were used to seeing as solid. Protocols existed for dealing with aliens. There were no protocols for being partially merged with one. Niara served as the xenobiology liaison, her knowledge of Luminina's ecosystem proving invaluable. Morgan led the newly formed cross-species medicine division. Their work was the best answer to the skepticism. They produced results. The neural synchronization had stabilized. It was no longer the raw, overwhelming flood of the jungle. It had settled into a permanent, low-frequency connection, a bridge between two minds. They didn't need to speak to coordinate. In the lab, Morgan would reach for a scanner as Niara was already preparing the sample. They functioned as a single research unit, their productivity far exceeding the sum of 2 individual scientists. The bond was a tangible tool. It allowed them to design experiments that considered both human and Lysathian perspectives from the ground up. They weren't just collaborating. They were integrated. Their work reshaped the potential of the entire station. A diplomatic meeting that would have taken hours of careful translation through devices could now achieve understanding in minutes through their linked mediation. A complex medical analysis involving alien biochemistry moved at a pace that left other researchers baffled. They had become a living proof of concept. The partnership that had been forged in survival was now demonstrating its value in peace. It was no longer just about them. It was about what their connection made possible for everyone else. They often came to the observation deck at the end of a shift. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The shared view was enough. The planet below was a reminder of where they started. A violent crash, a desperate struggle, a choice to trust. That near catastrophe had not ended with a simple rescue. It had produced something entirely new. They had not been saved and returned to their old lives. They had been transformed. They had created a new form of communication. A new model for collaboration. It was born from a simple act of holding on in the dark when letting go would have been easier. Now they were building the future on that foundation, looking down at the world that had forced them to become something more than what they were. From his first day in field medicine, Morgan learned a simple truth. The doctor stands apart. He observes. He diagnoses. He acts. The patient is a problem to be solved. The work was isolated heroism, a monologue directed at a broken body. The neural link shattered that model entirely. It could not function with distance. It required proximity, not just physical but cognitive. It forced a dialogue. Healing stopped being something he did to Niara. It became something they accomplished together. The traditional image of the lone medic, the hero with the medkit, was rendered obsolete. Replaced by a partnership. The link provided a form of understanding that no scanner could replicate. It bypassed biology. He didn't just read her vitals on a screen. He felt the specific, localized ache of the inflammation in her crystalline bone. He sensed the precise moment her 4 circulatory nodes fell into a stable rhythm. The process of diagnosis shifted from external observation to shared internal experience. The barrier between the observer and the observed dissolved. He was no longer looking at a foreign biological system from the outside. He was feeling its functions and dysfunctions from within. This changed the fundamental question from, "What is wrong with you?" to "What are we feeling together?" This new approach traversed more than biology. It crossed into culture and consciousness. Treating her was not just about calibrating tools for crystallized bone. It required understanding why her people valued anatomical self-knowledge as a survival trait. It meant respecting her history of exploitation, not as a footnote but as a critical factor in building trust. The medicine became a whole-being practice. It had to account for the trauma stored in her memories and the strength encoded in her instincts. Healing the body was inextricably linked to acknowledging the mind and the history it carried. Their work on the station built on this foundation. They did not develop human medicine for Lysathians. They created something new, a hybrid science. They combined human technological precision with Lysathian bioresonant awareness. A treatment was no longer a single compound. It was a spectrum of approaches, some technological, some biological, all filtered through their linked perception to ensure it harmonized with the patient's entire being. They were writing the first textbook for a field that hadn't existed a month before. Medical practice lost its authoritarian tone. The doctor was no longer the sole authority. The patient became the co-expert on their own condition. The process became a constant quiet dialogue, a negotiation between 2 kinds of knowledge. The bond they shared proved that the most scientifically transformative breakthroughs could also be the most deeply human, or in this case, deeply sentient. It validated connection as a clinical tool. They had effectively redefined the entire premise of interstellar care. The old model was about translation, taking a human protocol and trying to make it fit an alien biology. Their new model was about integration, building a fresh understanding from the shared ground between 2 species. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a paradigm shift. It proved that the greatest medical instrument wasn't the most advanced scanner or the smartest drug. It was the willingness to truly connect, to let another consciousness into your own and to heal from the inside out. The frontier of medicine was no longer in the stars. It was in the space between minds. They were analyzing a new plant sample in the lab, its leaves emitting a soft ultraviolet shimmer. Morgan made a dry comment about the fungus on his old ship tasting better. Niara's skin patterns shifted into a slow, rhythmic ripple. It was her version of a laugh. "Your humor is a strange and inefficient form of communication," she noted, her tone even. "Yet it appears to be functional. Progress is being made." Their work was far from easy. Skepticism was a quiet hum in the station's corridors, a constant background noise. Reports were scrutinized with excessive care. Every new finding was met with a demand for triple verification. Some of the Science Council still saw their neural link as an anomaly, a glitch to be corrected rather than a tool to be utilized. They faced the persistent, wearying friction of proving something that should have been self-evident. Every day was a negotiation with bureaucracy, a fight for resources, a defense of their methods. But the scale of their work made the resistance feel small. They were not working on a single project. They were building a foundation. They had, as Morgan put it, the entirety of cosmic existence to refine their technique. This was not the end of the road. It was the first step on a path that stretched into a future so vast it was difficult to comprehend. The universe was filled with countless species, each with their own unique biologies, their own ways of thinking. Their partnership was a single, small light in that immense darkness, but it proved a light could be lit. It offered a template, a hope. If a human and a Lysathian could achieve this, then perhaps others could too. The neural synchronization they were beginning to understand was not a unique fluke. It was a biological potential, a latent capability that could be activated under the right conditions. It required more than proximity. It demanded extreme duress, yes, but more importantly, it required absolute, unquestioning trust, a willingness to be vulnerable, a choice to connect rather than retreat. They were cataloging those conditions, turning a miracle into a science. They had become the living proof. They were no longer just Morgan and Niara. They were the partnership, a walking, talking embodiment of what was possible when two species looked past their differences and chose to see the strength in connection. Their very presence on the station was a quiet, constant argument against isolationism. There was a deep irony in it. They had found each other in the most isolating of circumstances, a shipwreck on an unknown world. The situation was designed for desperation, for every being for themselves survival instinct. Instead, it had favored connection. The very thing that should have torn them apart had bound them together more tightly than any protocol or treaty ever could. They often returned to the observation deck at the end of the day. They looked out at the star-dusted blackness, at the faint green marble of Luminina 60s below. They did not speak of the challenges or the skeptics. They spoke of the work ahead. The next experiment, the next potential discovery. The future was not a thing to be feared. It was a frontier to be explored, and they would explore it together. The simple, instinctive act of holding a hand in the dark, a gesture meant only to offer comfort in a moment of pain, had become their compass. It continued to guide them, a fixed point in the vast and unknown cosmos, proving that the most profound journeys begin not with a leap, but with a grasp. He looked at their hands, still linked. The connection they forged proved a simple truth. Healing isn't a safe process. It demands risk. It requires trust so deep you let another consciousness into your own mind. The biggest breakthroughs in medicine rarely start in a sterile lab. They begin with a basic human connection, a shared moment of vulnerability. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from following the rulebook. It comes from a simple, stubborn choice. It's the refusal, against all logic and protocol, to let go of a hand held in the dark.